Hello and welcome to 60 Minutes with Mr. K, the in-depth conversation series where I sit down with remarkable individuals to have real, reflective conversations about life, leadership, and the state of our nation. Today, I have with me a respected voice in Nigeria's political and economic landscape, a professor of political economy and a management expert whose ideas have influenced generations. In this conversation, we'll explore the state of our nation, the challenges we face, the opportunities that we have missed, and most importantly, the hope that lies ahead for us. My guest today is a man whose name is carved into the conscience of Nigeria's intellectual and civic life. For decades, he has stood at the intersection of ideas and action, reshaping and shaping public discourse, mentoring generations, and confronting failures of powers with fearless candor. He founded the Center for Values and Leadership to nurture integrity where corruption thrives, vision where complacency rules, and courage where silence is the easier choice. A former presidential candidate, prolific author, public intellectual, and unwavering advocate for a more just and prosperous Nigeria. His words have stirred minds and settled the comfortable and inspired countless to believe that our nation, Nigeria, can be better than it is today. So welcome to 60 Minutes with Mr. K, Professor Pat Utomi. Such a joy to have you here.
Great pleasure to be able to join you.
So there's so many things I've been wanting to talk to you about. A lot of them we have phone conversation and we discuss Nigeria quite a lot, whether you're in Nigeria or outside of the country. You and I have conversations regularly. So let me start from the most recent incident. The former president of Nigeria, the late President Muhammadu Buhari, passed away not so long ago. And it reminded me of a number of things which some people have described as a missed opportunity to move Nigeria to a new level. Because the mantra at that time was change, change, change. And the expectation was that having gone through the government of the PDP led at that time by President Jonathan, Goodluck Jonathan, some people said we needed a change and we needed a disciplinarian. We needed somebody who's going to be astute at instilling discipline and ensuring that there was no corruption. At that time, I was working with a different television station, and I had the opportunity of meeting with you, meeting with Kadi Fayemi, meeting with Rotimi Amici, and a number of people that were involved in the coming together of what at that time was described as APC, which was the coming together of CNPP, AD, ACN, and so on and so forth. One of the things that you and those people said to me was that there is a clear agenda, 100 days where Nigeria will just be so galvanized, moved into a complete change that everybody is going to be completely overwhelmed and amazed at how Nigeria is going to be. So, Prof, tell me, I don't think anybody's asked you this question on television that I've seen before. Maybe they didn't have that same conversation with you. I am keen to find out from you, what happened to the agenda that you guys all came to, including Professor Yemi Osinbajo? Every one of you touted this massive booklet of ideas. What happened to it, and why did we end up with 8 years that so many people have described as wasted?
Truly wasted. Yes. What happened? There was a coup within the process. And I outed the coup very early, literally very early, which is why I immediately took a backseat. Well, while we're busy plotting a future for Nigeria, and those who were politicals were saying, this is the man who has this cult-like following, whose votes will make it easy. So let's work with him. And he came to me from different angles. First of all, the progressives, a movement that Chief Enahoro started and Chief Olufalaye, now Oba, continued, kept saying, look, this man likes to catch thieves. Let's let him do what he enjoys doing, chase thieves. And let's have a team that will run the country. In fact, Chief Falaye's mantra to me, let's do everything to get this man. Let him chase thieves and let's get the country now gets going. So that's how the Buhari narrative began to come. At first, and I have to say this publicly and it's documented, I've written a book about it, I said, I can't trust this man. And many things were done to persuade me that we could work to get things. At a point, we got to the point of, if the only thing he does is stop corruption, it's worth the trouble. So we began to develop roadmaps. I can say, I don't have to say it, Professor Yemi Osinbajo himself, severally, while he was vice president, referred to the fact that the roadmap was written in my home with himself and some other persons. And then the elections took place. And this is what I'm speaking to those who are coming together again as ADC. Must not happen like that again. Our system invests powers in one person. We must not let that happen again. A team that wants to change the country must have collective responsibility. It must be owed. So once the elections were won, put in General Buhari's hand, first thing that came out was, General Buhari is a weak man. He's not a leader. How did that happen? Now, this is famous story that I won't be able to give the details of how Abba Kyari, who opposed Buhari, in fact, said to somebody I know very well that if Buhari became president, he would leave the country. That Buhari was a serial loser. Some people who had influence on Buhari got together without Buhari knowing, announced Abba Kyari's appointment as chief of staff. And Buhari was pressured into having to accept it. That's where the trouble started. So all those who worked on agenda were suddenly out of the picture. These guys who hated the agenda took hold of this man and his presidency. And within a couple of weeks of that election, he made several statements outside of the country even, frightened people like me as to the direction the country would travel. And because I don't suffer fools gladly, first opportunity I got to react was, not that of a trooper. And it was in Ibadan. I remember very clearly, Professor Tunji Olokba had just launched the Ibadan School of Government and Public Policy. I was present, one of the actors on that day. And shortly after, the media surrounded me, and they said, what do you think of what President Buhari said, wherever it was outside the world? And I said, that portends danger. We must beg him not to speak on these matters without consulting properly. Of course, some of the media, as usual, said, Pat Utomi says, Buhari doesn't know what he's doing. He must speak to his people before he speaks. But it was something more serious. I went to the man who is there today, incumbent, and I said to him, we've got to stop this man, or he will ruin this country. And he said to me, calm down, Anyway, the thing went on like that. I immediately began to back away because I knew we had lost the plot. Before he even had a cabinet, long before.
So 8 years, some people have described as wasted 8 years. Yeah. And at the same time, some people that were going to contest, and I remember very clearly when I was watching the APC convention, where all kind of politics took shape. There were individuals like Professor Yemi Osinbajo, like Rotimi Amechi and others that seemed to be the front runners, as well as the current president, Bola Ahmed Tinubu. And at some point, the table turned. And when the table turned, there was this impression that something gave way And somehow, the story that was being shared was that all of us, members of APC, want to continue the good work of Mr. President Muhammadu Buhari. And that good work, those of us who have lived through 7.5 years or so of this president, Muhammadu Buhari, were thinking, sorry, did we miss something? Where is the good work, or where are the good works of President Muhammadu Buhari? And APC members said there were good works, and that's what they wanted to continue. Did you watch that game that happened that night? And what was going through your mind when you were hearing the good works of 7.5 years of Buhari that they were touting?
I hope I will not disappoint you by saying that I had no stomach for that nonsense. I had long walked away from that thing. I knew APC was the doom of Nigeria. It was clear to me. And I walked away. And I wrote a book. Back then, the book is titled, Why Not? Citizenship, State Capture, Creeping Fascism, and the Criminal Hijack of Politics in Nigeria. I wrote that book already. And I knew there was no point in engaging that conversation. So I didn't engage it. I didn't pay any attention to it. I just prayed that our country will be saved through some other means.
So when you saw all of that, and eventually APC won the election, or said to have won the election, and those who wanted to go to court went to court and got nothing out of it. So where do you think we are now, 2 years on?
Well, you can look at this from all kinds of perspectives, but once the Buhari thing looked like it was going to be a farce, I began to think, what do we do to save Nigeria? I began to develop some initiatives. And one of the initiatives that I worked on was, we need a political party, a real political party in Nigeria. I'd been around, I'd seen the PDP come up. I knew it wasn't a political party. It was essentially an election winning machine. I was actually excited when not too long ago I saw a book of speeches by Alhaji Bamanga Tukur, who was chairman of PDP at some point, I believe. And one of the titles jumped at me, and he said, PDP must avoid becoming just a machine to win elections. That's what PDP was clear to me. And it was clear to me that APC had become, representing absolutely nothing but just a vehicle that people can use to ganache power. And by the way, I challenge anybody to test me on this. There's been no election in Nigeria since 1999. All elections have been outright frauds. I can tell you that. I have evidence around the world that's been compiled by researchers that can prove it very easily. But that's another matter. So I began to think, how do we create a political party? A real political party that's not just something that wins elections. Then we began to work on what people have described as a third force. And we began to develop it. Somewhere along the line, my view was that one of the big challenges that happen in Nigerian politics is a disconnect of state and society. Major political actors didn't really care about the Nigerian people, real people. They were elites trading opportunities to take care of themselves. And so I thought, how do we connect to the grassroots, the real people of Nigeria, and to make them part of a political party that essentially now governs in the interest of the common good of all? And I thought, labor unions would be, from the point of view of structure, a good place to start. I began to engage the labor leadership. I had lots of meetings with the leadership at the time. The president of the NLC at the time was Ayuba Baba. On my birthday of 2022, February 6, 2022, he gave a speech that really embraced what I had been trying to do, that we could work together to make that happen. So that track I began to pursue. I also recognize that there's more than one way to skin a cat. We need an education of the Nigerian people to understand where we are. We needed a vehicle that could do that. That was not a political party. Even though political parties are supposed to carry out political socialization and all of that, but one that could not be suspected as having motives of winning an election. So what could we do to create a movement that will educate the people? So I began to work on an initiative that could do that, different from working on this political party with labor. Outcome, as we all know, was part of what we saw as the elections or campaigns of 2023. The movement that came from it, in spite of the abuse of the electoral process, it gave me hope that we could actually find a platform for educating the Nigerian people. One of the things that the people who subverted that effort did, which pains me to the marrow today, is that, and it's not peculiar, let's be fair, around the world, emotions as substitute for rational thinking get injected into politics. The Americans are dealing with it now. Nigeria was beginning to lose it. We were not having rational public conversation. Educated people were getting sucked into ethnicity in ways that I couldn't believe. And one of my major projects is trying to explain identity politics and the silliness of ethnicity. If you study migration, you will find that language, as it began to develop, the way that it developed was those who moved when language had begun to form, early stages of it, from amongst this particular stock. If you go back to the certain words that describe primary parts of engagement, body parts and co, you will find that they have almost the same words. So when Igbos and Yorubas do all these silly things about one another, Eti in Yoruba is Nti, Enu in Yoruba is Onu in Igbo, Imu in Yoruba is Imi in Igbo. And you can go on like that. It tells you that Igbos and Yorubas are bloody cousins. One group just moved further east.
How does this translate to where we are today in terms of who is in government and the accusations of everybody is either from Lagos or is Yoruba? And the same thing happened during the era of President Muhammadu Buhari, where they said 70% of those who are in government were Hausa, especially appointive offices. And there was this accusation of 70 to 80% who handled the national security were Hausas. That seems to still be the case.
The simple thing for me is, first, if you have a system of merit, really merit-driven, and you get the best from wherever they come from to start with as part of the base of the merit. So yes, we should have merit to get the very best. Then, having got the very best from this pool, you look at fair geopolitical representation so that you will have a representative bureaucracy that works. But outside of this and saying these people and hearing all the kind of hate speech people spin, whether it's an Igbo man talking about Yoruba man or Yoruba man talking about Igbo, I cringe. I really cringe when I see any of those things and I hear it. Really? Excuse me? But politicians have done that deliberately because they are focused on power, not purpose. And they use it to prevent, they may not know that, prevent institutional evolution and therefore lack of development.
This issue of ethnicity is such a ridiculous conversation that it should not even creep into what we're discussing when we're talking politics. Some people said, yes, we will agree with you, Professor Pat Utomi, but that in doing that, it means that we don't have to have any care about whether the person that becomes the next president of Nigeria is from the south or from the north. So why can't Atiku take over the next election and win?
I'm not one to argue where one comes from, in a sense, from that, except for the fact that inclusiveness, I talk about inclusion, it matters. I can deal with not caring anything, but that those who have not evolved.
So, sorry, Prof, if an Atiku emerges as candidate and is willing to be inclusive, you will support?
If anybody is inclusive, Atiku is a very good friend of mine, let me say up front, but I probably won't support an Atiku presidency because he's 80 years old. I, Pat Utomi, on the brink of 70, will not run for president because I'm now too old for a population that is a mean of 19.
Okay, so let me take you slightly back a bit. Not too long ago, there was June 12 celebration, and some people got awards and recognition. I guess your name was not part of those being celebrated. And those who understand history, who have read the history books, or maybe not read the history books, who are alive during the struggle of Chief MKO Abiola, the June 12, they do wonder that there were quite a few people that were not mentioned there. And you know the history because you were part of it. What's your own understanding of what the history was and how it seems to have been twisted?
Well, it's been twisted in so many ways, but that's part of the primitive politics that we play, as I call it. June 12th. Thank God that many of us were in the whole structure, campaign, everything. Then it was annulled after we all voted. And some of us decided, no, we've got to stand up against this. You know, typically in Nigeria, people go, you know, I wrote an article immediately after, because 2 days after the elections, after we voted, I traveled out of the country. And I was still out of the country when the thing was annulled. I immediately from Boston wrote an article that was published in The Guardian that was titled, "We Must Say Never Again." That article galvanized, I said to, you know, professionals, we can't leave this to politicians. This thing is too important for politicians. And professionals, you know, citizens should come out and stand up for something. And people were saying, okay, so what do we do? And I wrote a second article, invited two friends of mine, Atedo Peterside and Sam Oni, to co-sign this with me. It became the basis of the founding of the Concerned Professionals. And anyone who remembers that era will remember that there was probably no more credible a group. Even NADECO, as it was called, was given much impetus by the work that the Concerned Professionals did to stimulate KANU, the Council of National Unity and Understanding, a group of elders who used to meet under the leadership of General Adeyinka Adebayo, Commander Ebitu Kiwe, and co. That then became essentially NADECO. I find it sad that probably nobody from the Concerned Professionals was even mentioned. These guys who have hijacked power think that if they decide that they made history, that is where history will be. History will eventually unravel who was who. I think even your incumbent, when he met me in 1998, after he returned from the UK, came to me and said, look, my claim to fame is because I was the one who could tell NADECO abroad what you were saying in Nigeria. He said that. It's not a secret.
When you look at where we are today, and you have an assessment of the government that we have in place today, and you look at how the election was won and how the government is being run, what goes through your mind when you look at that and say to yourself that we're where we are, we deserve it or not?
You know, I must express surprise in the sense that my general view of those who control public authority today is that they were more savvy than they've acted. And I give you an example of Yaradua. When Yaradua took office, he said publicly, the process that got me here was flawed, but I want to make sure it doesn't happen again. And he reached out broadly. And I can tell you, as somebody he spent hours with, trying to convince to join his government, that Yaradua could have been one of our greatest presidents had he lived, because he had that sense. I thought incumbent was more political savvy and would even move further and faster. But certain triumphalism took over that has compounded the problems of legitimacy and has affected progress, no matter what statistics are thrown at you. But we can only hope that somehow our country will manage to get itself back on track.
Okay. All right. When we come back, one of the questions I said I was going to ask you before we got on TV was the one to do with Professor Wole Soyinka, 90 years old, you approaching 70. him for more than 30 years that said his generation was wasted. Do you feel that your generation is wasted? I am now 60. I am feeling like we haven't even achieved anything through my generation. I can't think of so many 60-year-olds who have done anything fantastic with Nigeria's political history. So there's a lot to talk about. But we'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll continue this important conversation with Professor Pat Utomi, diving deeper into the leadership, legacy, and the future of Nigeria's political economy. Do stay with us.
Africa needs its own storytellers, people who understand the continent because they're from it. People who know that news is more than just a conversation starter, it's our stories. Because these stories run deeper than headlines and segments. It's about digging deeper to get the facts and telling the human side of every single story, not just the echoes from foreign headlines and perspectives. It's time to take back our narratives and share them in our voices. The birth of Africa's New Age reporting, and this is where it begins, right here at News Central TV, with stories that put Africa first.
Welcome back. We still have with us Professor Pat Utomi, a political economist, and for the last 30, 40 years, probably even 50, since Professor Wole Soyinka has been saying his generation was wasted. Do you feel that your generation is wasted? And those who are in their 50s and 60s, should they be having the same consideration? And what can be done to not leave a legacy that means that the future is consistently and continuously bleak?
It's a very, very long explanation, but we need to overcome it. Nigeria has experienced a collapse of culture. The values have gone so south that people don't even understand the purpose of being. And I think a few things come together to explain that. One is what I like to call the dangerous alchemy of soldiers and oil. Soldiers getting into power, centralizing authority, a lot of new resources flowing in through oil, and we created essentially a rentier state and a class of people that look for the best way to extract rent from the system. And corruption went mega wild. If you go back to the generation of founding fathers, look how many of them thought about money as what defined them. Michael Okpara, Premier of Eastern Region, all of New Haven, GRA, Enugu, responsibility for all of that, didn't give himself one plot. It was unethical to so do. Check my friends who run Lagos, what they give themselves. Just leave that to, you know. Sardauna of Sokoto, Sir Amadou Bello, when he died, he had but a few Babarigas to his name as premier of all of Northern Region. Even President Shagari, who had the privilege to serve as president, when he left office, didn't have a house. I visited him in 1986. He was living in a bungalow built by the Sokoto state government for him. Can you say that about any of these characters running around saying they're leaders today? So we began to miss it with the prebendal state that soldiers and oil came together to create. And so, and some of us have looked like idiots trying to focus on values, but that is the only way that you can get people to actually leave legacy. If what matters is driven by a higher purpose than the size of a bank account. But you see, you can get into
Sorry to
politics.
interject,
Yes.
Rob. I was just thinking as we were talking that a lot of young people that watch our program on News Central will be saying, Prof, what did you do for Nigeria? What was your area of sacrifice? Have you ever put your life on the line? That will be their
you
question.
kidding me?
They will be asking the
Oh, they'll be
question,
asking.
but they don't know.
They don't
so
know.
you tell them.
During the era of the concerned professionals, I survived 2 assassination attempts. This is court documented. My friend, incidentally, Yemi Oshibajo, was then Attorney General of Lagos before he became Vice President, was the one prosecuting. And the evidence is in courts about those who tried to assassinate me on account of fighting for June 12th, as the guy who doesn't get mentioned in Bola Tinubu's list, 2 assassination attempts. When Nigeria could have done a number of things, and I'm just thinking about appropriateness of talking about everything, it's not everything you talk about,
On TV.
Yeah, on TV. When I could have come forward and taken big care of myself, I said no. Even the Yaradua experience, which was not finished, when he asked me to come and serve as a minister in his cabinet, and I said, I think what we need now is a good opposition that creates and we argued that for nearly 2 hours. And in the end, he persuaded me, actually, that it was better to work from inside. However, the point remained that conversation was still ongoing when, again, he passed away. But repeatedly, when I was like in my 40s and was in the middle of many things, I wrote a book titled Business Angel as a Missionary. That book was written because Ben Murray Bruce of Silverbird Television and so on and so forth came to see me and said, let me ask you, why do you hate money? I said, me, hate money? Professor of entrepreneurship, hate money? How can I possibly hate money? He said, look, he started naming people who he believed made fortunes off of my shoulders. He said, but you live so simply and all of that. And to explain it to him, I wrote that book. Not to him personally, but since it was an issue, I didn't realize people were talking about it. I wrote that book, Business Angel as a Missionary, to talk about the companies that I helped create and was not thinking of what I was taking out of helping create them, because I believe that central to development is a place of entrepreneurship. The sacrifices I made, the costs that I suffered to create young entrepreneurs. One day, I called my research assistant. I said, I want you to get me 24 or so young men and women who are in their 20s and maybe 30s, who look like young people of purpose. You developed a list, and I invited all of them to a lunch, I think it was. And I began to tell them about how the world, I thought, should unfold, the role they could play in doing that. If you hear that list today, the fella drew to is the Nia Disonyas, the Ubongesians, Bega Chessons, and so on. Then I moved, when they began to come up, I moved to the next generation. Chude Jidonwo, and his gang with the Future Awards and co. I began to mentor second generation. So I think that the work that I have done in mentoring young people is, I hate it. I'm more talking about it. You put me in a position to have to talk about it, but I don't like to talk about it.
But a lot of young people need to hear, especially those, the Twitter crowd, the X crowd, they need to understand. But let's move away from that. So in a piece you wrote recently, you argued that the federal government's desperate scramble for revenue is actually stifling economic growth. So for viewers who may not have read that piece, can you please break down what you're trying to say in essence? Because some people think you're just unhappy that you're not part of this government, especially those who are in government.
Yes,
there are those who
always
are
talk that kind of nonsense.
They say things that because you're not part of the government, you don't seem to understand, and you cannot seem to understand.
Now, as we speak, this desperate need, we need revenues. By the way, I entered this space Nigerian political space talking about taxation in 1983, writing about taxation and wondering and worrying that we were not taxing people, and therefore the accountability role that provides people the opportunity to engage with was being lost. But that's another story. Now, today, this rush for revenues is resulting in a situation where most people cannot import essentials because they are taxed out. Just go and check what's going on right now in the ports. The people who are bringing in pharmaceuticals, many of them can't import the next round because what they've been charged on the current imports is such that they won't make any profit selling what they brought in. 9 people are dying an hour in Nigeria from malaria. What it takes to stop a death from malaria is $10. But 9 people are dying an hour from it. And then these guys won't import the next container because of what they're paying. Revenues are good if you invest them properly in things that stimulate production.
So what do you see the government investing the revenue that is making? Because
don't you
they're
see
sharing a lot of money amongst the governors.
Absolutely. That is what I find problematic.
The federal allocation has increased.
It has increased. There's so much money and so much rascally use of public money by politicians. National Assembly, if I have my way, I will suspend it for a few years until we understand what...
Or you suspend the National Assembly?
Yes, until I understand what legislation is about. What it cost this country can develop it. What National Assembly, it should not be, but that's what it is. Okay, we're collecting all these revenues. We can't even pay doctors, nurses. They're all going on strike. What's the revenue being used for? The triumph of politics has led us to being unthinking about what develops a country. 2 fundamental things that drive development: education and healthcare. Check China, check Vietnam, check anybody who's coming along. Investment in education. Where's education right now? What's being invested in it with all the revenues being collected? It is just that we have not focused on what's important. What is the priority? Revenue, revenue, revenue. Yes, Washington, the World Bank people will shout revenue. Look at tax to GDP ratio. Look at this. Absolutely correct. Hey, but they're talking of a different kind of economy from this economy. Look, I lived through an era when we had all these same things. It was about stabilization. And that was okay. We needed stabilization of my economy that had gone awry by 1982, 83, 84. What happened? In the pressure to respond to it, we killed the most important sectors, education and healthcare.
So as a political economist, then when they say that the Senate approved President Tinubu's request for an external borrowing plan of over $21 billion for the 2025-2026 fiscal cycle, a move that has sparked concerns about how much debt the nation is carrying realistically. So we have revenue coming in. We're making more money from oil than we've ever made in the last 20 years. But still, we're borrowing a lot more. You as a political economist, how do you analyze this? Help me unbundle it.
Again, the first thing that they will say to you is, but you need to borrow so you can grow. You know, I remember, thank God I've been around for quite a while. Back in the 1970s when President Obasanjo was head of state, the Arab-Israeli Yom Kippur War of 1973 led to significant shifts of money from oil-consuming countries to the pockets of oil-producing countries like Nigeria. And where did we put those monies? We put them in Western banks, Wall Street. And Wall Street was looking to recycle these monies. And what did they do? They started saying to us, you are grossly under-borrowed, given the economy of Nigeria. You should borrow more to use to drive greater development. Remember James Oluleye, General James Oluleye was Federal Commissioner Minister for Finance. And he was sent off to go and negotiate jumbo loans. I still remember the newspaper headlines. There was one cartoon, I remember Oluleye in an aircraft carrying these huge sacks of jumbo loans. And then they descended. 4 years later, we're in a debt trap. How do you let a mistake you have made before come back to haunt you? If every money we borrow externally is tied to a game plan of how it's invested in something whose returns directly amortize it, hey, I'll be the happiest man in the world. But this tax and spend business, which is what borrowing is really about, it's exactly what some economists fight with things like Proposition 13 that California had many years back, requiring a balanced budget amendment and stuff like that. If you are not careful, you will harm tomorrow because, hey, by then you're not around, you're gone. You know, even George Bush, as Vice President, George Bush Jr. says, what's history? By then we'll be long dead. But history matters because there's consequence for everything. If you don't do the right thing, the consequence will haunt you.
Then let me ask you, are you bitter about the fact that you've not had a go? Because there was a time that you actually would have loved to be the president of Nigeria. Do you have any bitterness about that lack of opportunity to be the change agent or change maker in Nigeria?
You know, you've got to understand the drivers of a person's value system to determine whether a person can be bitter or not bitter. If I were so desperate to run, why would I step down for somebody else to have that play? All I have been anxious about is that in my time, Nigeria rise up again. And anybody who can make it happen, I embraced. Anybody, from anywhere. I have literally done everything to support anybody who imagined the system with thought and all of that of what can make it. And I have said repeatedly, I don't need to be a part of it. In fact, the less I am in it, when things work, the better for me. Because truly, what I have always desired is the simple life. In 1983, as a 27-year-old, I was invited into Shagari government. That's what I was studying for, working for, time to change things. I came into government. And every idea I suggested, one permanent secretary said to me, you will step on this person's toe. They will step on that person's toe. And one day I said to him, Mr. Bull, what is it possible to do without stepping on somebody's toe? And when the coup d'etat came, I said, this is a saving bell. I will never enter government until I am sure that you have enough influence to actually make real change happen. And I believe that I am not there.
Okay, so in a couple of sentences, we're going to take a break now. In a couple of sentences, do you think President Bola Ahmed Tinubu can do anything right in your eyes?
He's done some things right.
Oh, like what?
Emeka Dosu runs a pretty good central bank, in my view. He's done things right. Now, but if you come out talking about what has been done right, then you miss the point of how government is supposed to run. It's supposed to point out what's not done right so it can be done right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, we'll pause here for a quick timeout. When we return, we'll continue this compelling conversation with Professor Pat Utomi, exploring more on leadership now, national renewal, and what hope looks like for Nigeria. Stay with us. Welcome back, Professor Pat Utomi. It's such a very interesting time having this conversation with you. You've championed the idea of a shadow government and helped form the Big Tent, a coalition of parties, civil society, and technocrats. For viewers who may not fully understand it, what does a shadow government mean in a country like Nigeria with a presidential system, not parliamentary one? How would it work in practice, and what do you see as its vital for strengthening democracy and holding leaders accountable when you're not a party that they recognize as having contested in an election?
Well, you know, this conversation goes back many years. That's why I'm shocked at the ignorance of those who are trying to engage with it. As one deeply interested in democracy and how it can serve the people, I've always thought, what could be the best way of getting that rational public conversation going? So I know that this system doesn't provide for proper opposition. And so I suggested to Chief Olufalaye way back then, the need to get several of the political parties together and we create a shadow government, a shadow cabinet, not as a government or the British type. These are a group of citizens who say, we want to be more articulate in the way we understand the problems of government. So, Kayode, you be responsible for communication. Everything that they are doing in the Ministry of Communication, try and understand it and give us an alternative to how it can be done. You are not an organ of government. You don't get paid a salary. You're just a civic organization doing your duty as citizens in society. You have no instrument of government. You simply just analyze, make it available to the public to use to understand better, and make it even available to the government themselves. So I was deeply distressed to hear the kind of conversations that took place around it. I wasn't sure if it was ignorance or if it was deliberate mischief or whatever it was that motivated the way the thing rose. But this thing goes back to 2008. And we've had it. We've actually been running a shadow team.
So the state security has questioned or challenged your proposal, and their move has created a level of debate in the public about whether this is appropriate or not. So what do you make of this controversy that it's generating? Why is it so difficult to understand the fact that people should challenge government?
I don't know, but it is a very dangerous pattern that I see evolving. We're moving closer and closer to tyranny. The fear of alternative views is dangerous for any society. Very dangerous. It's in the best interest of those in power to realize what happened to those before them who did not like alternative views.
So when you look at the party you supported in the last election, you supported the Labour Party and you supported Mr. Peter Obi. Now he seems to be rubbing shoulders with people who are said to have gone into the ADC without him resigning from Labour Party and seem to be 1 foot in, 1 foot out when it comes to the ADC. What do you make of the way our politicians just seem to behave in the language of the young people? Not my words, in the language of young people. They behave like prostitutes, political prostitutes, in one place today, in another place tomorrow, and jumping from one to the other, and sometimes holding two together and saying they're part of both.
Well, again, everything evolves. There's context to everything. Unfortunately, because taking opposition view is often considered a death sentence in this country, I can tell you what I have suffered holding on to truth all these years. I can tell you the impact on my business interests, on my this and that, but I'm ready to live with it. I know there's a price for everything, and I'm ready to pay the price. Not many are willing to do that. And so the political terrain confuses many people. Somebody will call you in the evening and say, my God, thank you. Yes, you are doing this for us. This is in the morning. He won't want to be seen with you in public. The same person, lest the people in government see that I'm talking to this guy. It's just foolish. The country belongs to all of us. We have the same interest. I have the same interest as Bola Tinubu in getting Nigeria to run. It's just one citizen and another citizen. He's holding a particular position for now. it always passes. After a few years, he will not be there. And we don't seem to learn these things. And so we create all these polarities that prevent us from functioning together for the good of our country. And if there is a movement to bring politicians to cross all those various divides that they have, I will always support it.
Do you want to join ADC?
Oh, yeah. By the way, I was at the very first meeting that started this process.
When people talk about political strange bedfellows...
And I want to explain that to you.
Yes.
Because that is very, very important. You've got to get a political class that has not met expectations to be ready to do a mea culpa as part of national rebuilding. Now, when those people are doing their mea culpa, you've got to recognize that they are not the face of the future. And these people must recognize that that is the reality. I have been building a front of 50-something-year-olds and 60-something-year-olds who have credibility from what they have done in life, some who have been politicians, but have not been in the kind of positions that people are weary and leery of their conduct, as some of those you may be talking about in this, as one wing. And I have like 30 of them major on ready right now. And I want to finish up building a second group of 20-something and 30-something-year-olds. After I was 27, when I was in that kind of position in government, they are smart 20-something-year-olds who are smarter than I was when I held that kind of position. I want to bring them together and in all cases cross Nigeria from Maiduguri to Lagos to Port Harcourt and all of that. And I'm going to show up at the next big ADC tent meeting with these 100 people who can lead.
Is that not a big dream that probably may never turn into anything?
It's done. That meeting can be anytime soon, and these people are ready. I can give you some of their names already. And I walk with them to that meeting, and I say, you guys have done your country a favor by doing this mea culpa and wanting to get together for the sake of the common good. Play fathers of the nation and let the country move forward.
So how do you convince an Atiku that, oh, I have 50-something-year-old and 40-something and 30-something and 20-something, and I want them to be
and
the one
Atiku hasn't said to you
yes,
that it must be him. Has he said that? Yes, he said
not,
that. You are assuming.
No, I'm not making any assumption. I'm just asking the question.
I don't say because people have had a flood yesterday that they should not be part of trying to build a new beginning.
So the new beginning will then be the people that are the front-facing personalities that some of them have been tainted and some of them maybe not because we don't have any cases in court about them. These are the same set of people.
We don't know who will be the front faces. They could be the guys coming with me.
Well, okay, let me move on very quickly because we have to wrap up now. Under the leadership of Right Honorable Benjamin Okeze-Kalu, Nigeria is driving what's being described as the most comprehensive constitutional amendment process in our history, with over 87 priority bills aimed at tackling critical areas of national development. From your perspective, does this review go far enough to address the deep structural issues you spent years highlighting, and do you think that there will be any fundamental change with what the National Assembly is doing today? Or is doomed for failure?
I don't know. The Patriots have a track running. We have to review everything. But I think that we have to look at credibility. National Assembly doesn't have credibility. That's unfortunately the truth. Because of the way that it has acted, people don't believe that they will act against their own interest. And their own interest generally does not align with Nigeria's best interest in the way that people have seen it through the years. But I'm not going to condemn what they're doing. I'm going to say, let 1,000 flowers bloom.
So would it be a good idea for you to focus more on young Nigerians going to the National Assembly to change that body that seemed to be rubber stamping, or you think it has to be the president that has all the powers? And
the powers of the president have to be cut down dramatically in a new constitution. We can't continue like that. If I would, in fact, have any influence, most important level of government for me is local government. It's closer to the people. If you were to think of Nigeria in terms of economic development units and local governments are seen as such, rather than where you send your T-boy to go and do whatever, we would have a different country.
So would you be encouraging any young person to say, you know what, go to the local government?
Oh, yes. I would encourage young people to go into parliament, the National Assembly, to go into local government, to go into every level.
So this government now, do you have any hope for the next 2 years?
It depends on what they do.
But what
And this
doing,
view
the
that Tinubu can do right in my eye is silly.
No,
the man is my friend.
Yes, so but is the trajectory where they are now and where they're going, 78 trillion in terms of debt level, is that going to change?
No, I don't support that trajectory.
Yes.
I think, first of all, infrastructure should be and can be provided differently than the way we're trying to provide it, tax and spend. Infrastructure can significantly be provided through private capital. Thomas Piketty, French economist, who is probably the leading authority on capital in the 21st century, writes about the abundance of the availability of capital. But where does it go? It goes to places that make themselves attractive for capital to flow into. The problem is that the way we run Nigeria doesn't make Nigeria attractive for capital to flow into. And you have problems.
So somebody asked me the other day that the likes of Professor Pat Utomi and Professor Wole Soyinka, why are they not leading university professors and saying, let us tidy up our education system and making sure that that's the priority of every government for the next 4 to 8 years?
Again, it's the undervaluation of my contribution to this world. I have been involved in creating and running primary schools, secondary schools, universities, and nobody remembers that. I have, and most of them are best of the best. These ones that I've been involved with. But I never get credit for anything.
Yeah, so what would you be saying to other professors then and other Nigerians in terms of education? You've said it here that education and healthcare, the most critical, most important, because a nation with no healthcare is not going anywhere.
Absolutely.
No education, there is no development.
And take it back to local governments I was talking about. Education should go as the education in Benue State doesn't have to be the same as the education in Bayelsa or Sokoto, because you take the factor endowments that Benue has. Let's take Gum Arabic. So let's take sesame seeds. The primary school curriculum should be such that a kid finishing primary school can improve yield on sesame seed by X factor. By the time they finish secondary school, they don't even want to look at your university because they know enough about the value chain of sesame seed to run successful businesses and live a very happy life.
So your final word in terms of hope for the future. Is there any hope for Nigeria at this point?
Absolutely. I believe that
What's the hope?
Nigeria will rise up again. It's a circle.
People are crying, we're hungry.
People are hungry. Yes, they are hungry.
Yes.
But we got to a sad point where our politics took the very worst amongst us. And we became a kakistocracy, the government of the worst. And people who are entering public life are not those who should enter public life. The philosopher king that Aristotle's of this world, Plato's of this world sought. Democracies, Socrates will argue, do not necessarily sometimes give rise to. And so, as Socrates himself said, one day criminals will want to be in government and democracy will have no choice but to give them that. And in many African countries, I think that has happened, sadly. We have to rethink politics.
Yeah, we have to rethink. On that note, Professor Pat Utomi, thank you for your time, your honesty, and your relentless dedication to truth and the difficult work of national renewal. Conversations like this remind us that ideas still have power and that a better Nigeria is possible if we're brave enough to face uncomfortable truth and act on them. And to you, our audience, thank you for staying with us. Your time and attention mean everything to me. It's these conversations and reflections that shape the kind of future we all hope to see. This has been 60 Minutes with Mr. K on News Central TV, where we listen, we learn, and we lean into the wisdom of those who've walked ahead of us. Until next time, stay with us, stay engaged, and never stop believing in the power of dialogue. Professor Pat Utomi, thank you so much, sir.
Great pleasure to be in your company.
Have you here. Thank you.